1 minute ago, the courtroom went dead silent. Not because of a witness, not because of a photo, but because of an audio file. A voice everyone knew, Diddy. And then, to everyone's shock, another voice answered him. Calm, British. It was Prince Harry. The jury froze. Reporters stopped typing. No one in that courtroom was prepared. The press had their cameras ready, the prosecution had their witnesses lined up, and even the defense team thought they had the upper hand. But everything shifted the moment Prince Harry walked through those doors. It wasn't just a celebrity moment. It was a disruption, like a royal tremor shaking the very ground beneath that federal courtroom. What followed didn't just change the case, it rewrote the story. He didn't stroll in with confidence or wear a polished grin for the cameras. His entrance wasn't loud, but it was loud in its own way. You could feel the air change. The room that had been buzzing with whispers dropped into silence so sharp, it could cut glass. He wasn't wearing a crown or medals. There were no bodyguards flanking him dramatically. He looked like a man carrying something heavy, something personal, and he walked like he didn't want to be there, but needed to be. And the strangest part? He didn't even glance at Diddy. Not once. Not even when he passed within feet of him. His eyes stayed low, glued to the courtroom floor like it held the pieces of a past he didn't want to revisit but couldn't ignore. You'd think someone like Harry, used to bright lights and massive crowds, would hold his head high. But not here. This wasn't Buckingham Palace. This was a federal courtroom, and the stakes were much higher than royal titles or tabloid rumors. No one in that courtroom was ready for what came next. When he finally took the witness stand, the whole room held its breath. Even the judge paused longer than usual before asking for him to state his name. Harry leaned in toward the microphone slowly, and for a moment, it felt like time was standing still. Then he spoke calmly, clearly, and with a tone that sounded more like confession than testimony. What he revealed after that line left everyone speechless. You all think I left the palace because of the press, but that's not why I left. I left because of what we'd built underneath it. That line hit like a hammer. You could feel the ripple of confusion and shock move through the room. Reporters looked up from their notepads. Attorneys glanced sideways at one another. Diddy sat stone-faced, and everyone listening suddenly realized this wasn't about family drama or gossip columns. It wasn't about Harry and Meghan versus the crown. This was something deeper, and possibly darker. The kind of truth no Netflix documentary had ever touched. The way Harry said those words, it didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded like someone finally letting go of a secret he'd been holding for years. A secret he never wanted to tell, but couldn't keep any longer. And the fact that he chose this courtroom, this moment to say it, that said more than any headline ever could. People will talk about that entrance for years. But it wasn't the silence that made it unforgettable. It was the weight of the truth that followed. A royal didn't just step into a courtroom that day. He stepped into a storm that's still unfolding. The courtroom had already gone still once when Prince Harry walked in. But when he started speaking, really speaking, no one knew how deep the story would go. You could see it on the faces of the jury. Confusion at first, then disbelief, and eventually that look people get when they realize something they thought was fiction might actually be real. Because the secret he let slip, that was just the first crack. Harry started by taking everyone back to 2007. He said it was during a charity gala at St. James's Palace, back when he was still very much the spare, smiling in photos, shaking hands, doing the royal dance. That night, he met Diddy. At the time, it just seemed like another powerful figure mingling in royal circles. But according to Harry, that night wasn't casual. It was the beginning of something planned, and the things that went down following that couldn't have been any better. He said Diddy didn't just talk about business or investment opportunities. He talked about building a legacy, something that could outlast the press, the titles, even the monarchy. It sounded glamorous and bold, the kind of idea that would appeal to a young man trying to find his place beyond his royal shadow. But what they ended up building wasn't legacy, it was a network. Harry called it the London Node. That phrase stopped the room cold. It sounded like a code name, something out of a spy film. But he said it was real, and it started right underneath Buckingham Palace. He explained that under the cover of routine palace renovations, things like fixing old stonework, upgrading the boiler system, reinforcing underground bunkers, they were actually creating new infrastructure. But these weren't tunnels for safety. These weren't for emergency exits or wartime bunkers. They were for something else entirely. The tunnels weren't just escape routes, Harry said, steady but tired. They were routes of access. He didn't name every name, but he said people came and went through those tunnels. Artists, politicians, influencers, even young people brought in through obscure programs. He said the idea was to create a space untouched by cameras and expectations, a place where rules didn't apply. He said at first he believed it was for peace, for creativity, for something meaningful, a kind of sanctuary from the outside world. But what those tunnels were really used for, that's what shook the courtroom. But over time, he said the place started to change. He didn't say it with anger. He said it like someone still wrestling with guilt. You could see his voice catch as he talked about how the deeper they built, the darker it all became. What started as a refuge slowly became something twisted, and the people who were once invited in weren't always free to leave. It was hard to listen to, not because he was loud or emotional, but because he was quiet, careful, like every word was a piece of something he didn't want to remember but couldn't forget. The jury didn't take their eyes off him. No one did. Because this wasn't just a prince spilling secrets. This was a man who helped build something he no longer believed, and who finally chose to tell the truth. When Prince Harry reached this part of his testimony, the room wasn't just quiet, it was holding its breath. You could almost hear hearts beating. Everyone knew something heavy was coming, but no one was ready for what he said next. He talked about 2011, a year that was supposed to be filled with joy and celebration. The event was a high-profile wedding, a diplomat's daughter getting married. The kind of event where the guest list is a who's who of global elites, royals, and celebrities. On the surface, it was elegance and class. But according to Harry, what happened after the ceremony was something else entirely. He said Diddy hosted the after-party. But this wasn't held in a hotel ballroom or a penthouse suite. It was below ground, literally beneath the city. He described descending into a space that felt like another world. There were red chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, casting an eerie glow over velvet-draped walls. The lighting made everything look surreal, almost dreamlike. There were guards at every corner, and jammers were used to block phone signals, meaning no one could call or even send a message. It was isolated by design. Then Harry said something that changed the entire mood in the courtroom. "I saw a girl," he said, his voice cracking, "no older than 15, crying." You could tell it wasn't easy for him to go on. He said he went to ask about her, thinking maybe she was lost or in trouble. But when he turned to Diddy and asked who she was, Diddy brushed him off coldly. "Not your concern, Prince," he replied. That moment, Harry said, shifted everything for him. It was like the curtain had been pulled back. He no longer saw an exclusive network or a legacy project. He saw something dark that he didn't want to be part of. He decided then that he wanted out. But walking away wasn't as simple as it sounded. In 2012, Harry said he made a move to step away. He tried to cut off ties, distance himself, disappear from the network. That's when Diddy told him something he'd never forget. "You don't leave the underground," he said with a grin. "Not once you've mapped it." Harry said he started getting threats after that. Emails with strange attachments, letters with veiled warnings. And then came the blackmail, clips taken from inside those underground rooms, images that could easily be taken out of context. Documents, some with his name and signature. Things he swore were fake, but powerful enough to ruin him if released. He was stuck. Not physically, but emotionally and politically. Trapped by a system he once helped build and now couldn't escape. His voice got quiet again as he said, "I helped design a cage, and then I realized I was in it." You could see it in his face, the guilt, the fear, the years of silence weighing down on him. It wasn't just regret, it was something deeper. Haunted, Because some nights, no matter how far you've run, the past still finds you. And the scariest part? He said the blackmail hasn't stopped. The question hung heavy in the air. Why come forward now? After all these years, after walking away from royal duties, after building a new life across the ocean, why take the risk, expose himself, and drag the past back into the spotlight? Prince Harry didn't blink. He didn't fumble for the right words. He answered with the kind of raw honesty that cuts straight through the noise. Because silence is worse than shame. Because that girl's face still wakes me up at 3 a.m. Because no crown is worth this rot. He wasn't just talking to the jury. He was talking to the world. And then came the moment no one expected. From inside his coat pocket, Harry pulled out a small USB stick and handed it directly to the prosecution. There was no ceremony, no hesitation, just the weight of quiet truth. The courtroom seemed to freeze for a second, as if the walls themselves were listening. Everyone expected a dramatic confession. What they got instead was evidence, but no one was ready for what was on that USB. Inside that tiny device was a mountain of material. First came the blueprints, technical diagrams of underground structures stretching beneath Windsor Castle and other royal properties. Not the kind you find in history books or museum tours. These were private, restricted layouts showing tunnels, rooms, and blind spots, places you weren't supposed to know existed. Then came the audio, conversations recorded without people knowing, voices, instructions, decisions being made in real time about how those tunnels would be used and who had access. The room grew colder with every clip. You could hear it in the gasps, the shifting of chairs, the silence of defense attorneys who suddenly stopped taking notes. But the footage, that's what truly shook the courtroom. Surveillance clips from inside those tunnels, cameras catching movements, gatherings, interactions that had never seen the light of day. People in and out, some faces recognizable, some hidden behind masks or hoods. All of it hidden in plain sight for years, protected by status, money, and a centuries-old wall of silence. It wasn't just Harry's word anymore. It was real, tangible, time-stamped. And just when it felt like the truth was out, another file loaded. You could feel the energy shift. What started as a testimony had become a revelation. The prosecutors scrambled to catalog what they had. Some members of the jury looked visibly shaken. A few reporters in the back of the room put down their pens. This wasn't about headlines anymore. This was history. Harry sat back, not smug or defiant, but quiet, like someone who had been carrying a stone in his chest for years and had finally put it down. He didn't look at the defense. He didn't search the room for approval. His job was done. He had handed over the truth, finally, fully. And as the judge called for a recess, no one moved, because everyone knew deep down that whatever came next, nothing would ever be the same again. The room was already tense. After Prince Harry's testimony and the USB that turned the case on its head, everyone expected something big. But no one, not the judge, not the jury, not the press in the back, was ready for what came next. The screen flickered on without a sound. A simple label sat in the corner. Windsor Tunnel Security Feed, 2:14 a.m., April 19th, 2015. And what played on that screen changed everything, again. At first, it didn't look like much. Just a hallway, old stone walls, a camera angle you'd expect from a castle's back corridors. But then came movement. Men in tailored suits and masks walked into view, their steps confident, like they'd done this before. And then came Diddy. There was no mistaking him. Red velvet jacket, shoulders back, hands folded behind him like he was inspecting a private gallery. He turned toward a section of wall and pressed something. What looked like plain stone cracked open to reveal a hidden panel. A door. Not a flimsy one. This was designed to disappear into history. The group walked through. The feed cut. People in the courtroom shifted, confused, until a second video file played. The camera showed a different space, one no one had imagined could exist under a royal residence. Thick velvet drapes hung from the walls. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above. The light was dim, gold-tinged, almost theatrical. In the center of the room sat a circular bed, so out of place it made your stomach turn. It wasn't a bedroom, it was a stage. The people in the video were masked. Their clothes were expensive, their movements casual, like they belonged there. Some lounged, some laughed, others simply watched. There were glasses of champagne being passed around and soft music playing, almost too soft to hear. It felt surreal, like something from a bad dream. And then the camera turned. And what happened next was unbelievable. In the corner of the frame, Diddy was laughing with another man. His face wasn't blurred, it couldn't be. The jury recognized him instantly, a former head of state, a name that's been on magazine covers for years. He was right there, not even trying to hide, laughing like this was a regular evening. Then, the worst part. The camera panned to the bed. There was a girl there. She looked nervous, barefoot, clearly uncomfortable. Her shoulders were hunched, like she was trying to shrink to herself. She couldn't have been more than 16. She wasn't part of the party. She looked like she wanted to disappear. That was when the first juror gasped. Another one started to cry, just quietly, hand over their mouth. The room froze. No one asked for the video to stop, but no one could look away either. You could hear the tension in every breath people took, like the air itself was heavier. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't speculation or testimony. This was real. You could see it, you could feel it, and after that, there was no going back. Not for the jury, not for the court, and definitely not for Diddy. There's always a moment in a courtroom when things shift, when a case stops being just about lawyers and evidence and becomes something heavier, something that lingers. This was that moment, and what the next clip showed made sure no one ever looked at Diddy the same again. And then he clicked one button, one frame forward. The screen showed a frozen image. No movement, no sound, just one still moment that would haunt everyone who saw it. 3 men sat in a semicircle. Diddy was one of them. Prince Harry was the second. The third man's face was redacted, blurred completely, but the posture, the suit, the expensive watch, it told you everything. Whoever he was, he mattered. In front of them stood a girl. She wore a white mask that covered her whole face. Just below it, tied around her neck, was a silver ribbon that trailed to the floor behind her, long like a leash. Her arms were by her sides, her head tilted downward. There was something disturbingly formal about it. It didn't look wild or out of control. It looked arranged, like a display, or worse, like a ceremony. Everyone in the courtroom saw the same thing at the same time. This wasn't a private party, or some over-the-top elite gathering. This was something far more calculated. The camera had caught everything. The posture, the positioning, and in the corner of the frame, something that made several people lean in without even realizing it. A crest, embroidered on the jacket of a man standing nearby. An attendant, likely royal staff. The camera zoomed in slowly, almost painfully. It wasn't just any crest, it was Windsor's private insignia. The judge, who had been stoic throughout the entire hearing, looked away. His face turned pale. He couldn't keep his eyes on the screen. It was too much. That image, the 3 men, the girl, the ribbon, the royal crest, said more than 100 pages of documents ever could. It wasn't hearsay or rumor. It was evidence, real, undeniable. People didn't talk for a while after the screen went dark. The moment the crest came into view, the case went from criminal to historical, and you'll never guess why. Even reporters stopped scribbling in their notepads. For once, there were no whispers in the gallery. The room was frozen in disbelief, like it needed time to process what it had just seen. And deep down, everyone knew that after a moment like this, nothing would ever be the same again. Not for the monarchy, not for Diddy, and not for those who had stayed quiet for far too long.